My name is Sophia Grant, and I'm 28 years old. If you asked my parents, they'd tell you I was the troublemaker, the one who always caused problems. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, I was the one holding our family together, quietly working behind the scenes to keep everything afloat. I paid for the mortgage on our home, covered my parents' bills, and even funded my younger brother Ryan's expensive college tuition. I never complained, never asked for recognition, I just wanted to see my family happy. But all of that changed in an instant. One accusation turned my world upside down, and the people I sacrificed everything for turned their backs on me. The accusation came out of nowhere, like a storm on a clear day. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and I was still in bed, scrolling through my phone, when the door to my room burst open. My mom stood there, her face flushed with anger, gripping a crumpled bank statement in her hand. "Sophia. Where's the money?" she demanded, her voice sharp and trembling. I sat up, completely confused. "What money?" I asked cautiously, trying to make sense of what was happening. Before I could get another word in, my dad appeared behind her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his expression cold and unyielding. "Don't play dumb," he said sternly. "Your brother saw you sneaking around last night. We had $5,000 saved for emergencies, and now it's gone." My heart dropped as the words sank in. "What? I didn't take anything. Why would I steal from my own family?" I protested, my voice rising in disbelief. But before I could say more, Ryan stepped into the doorway with tears streaming down his face. He looked at me with an expression of false sorrow that made my stomach churn. "I'm sorry, Mom," Ryan sniffled dramatically. "I didn't want to believe it either, but I saw her near your room last night. I thought maybe she just needed the money for something important." His voice trailed off as he wiped away a fake tear. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at him in shock. He was lying, blatantly lying, and he was doing it so effortlessly that it made me sick. "Are you serious right now, Ryan?" I snapped, standing up from my bed. "You know I didn't touch that money. Why are you doing this?" But my words fell on deaf ears. My mom shook her head in disappointment while my dad's glare hardened further. "We work so hard to make ends meet," my mom said bitterly. "And this is how you repay us? By stealing from your own family?" "I didn't," I shouted, but it was no use. My dad raised his hand to silence me. "Enough," he said coldly. "We can't have a thief living under our roof. Pack your things and leave." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were kicking me out, without even giving me a chance to prove my innocence. I turned to Ryan one last time, hoping for some shred of decency from him, but he avoided my gaze and wiped at his fake tears again. The betrayal stung more than words could describe. With no other choice, I packed my bags in silence while they watched from the hallway like strangers observing someone they no longer recognized. Before I share what happened next, the moment where everything changed for good, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? If so, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and strength. And if you've ever had to fight for what's right against all odds, hit that like button, because trust me, this story is far from over. The door slammed shut behind me, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of complete isolation. Standing on the cracked pavement outside my family's house, I clutched my small suitcase, my heart pounding with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The people I had sacrificed everything for, the ones I thought would always have my back, had turned me away without hesitation. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. Automatic payment of $1,250 processed, mortgage payment successful. My hands trembled as I realized the cruel irony of the situation. They had just kicked out the person paying for their home. For years, I had quietly taken on the role of provider, covering everything from the mortgage to utilities and even Ryan's exorbitant college tuition. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and rarely spent money on myself, all so they wouldn't have to worry. And yet, they never knew. They never cared to ask where the money came from or how I managed to keep things running smoothly. Now that they had thrown me out like garbage, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating: no more. No more payments. No more sacrifices. No more being taken for granted. I opened my banking app right there on the sidewalk and began canceling every automatic payment tied to their lives: mortgage, electricity, water, tuition. With each cancellation, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It was as if I was finally cutting the chains that had bound me to a family that didn't value me. They thought they could survive without me? Let them try. As I walked away from the house that no longer felt like home, a small voice in my head whispered doubts: what if they can't manage? What if they lose everything? But another voice, stronger this time, answered, that's not your burden anymore. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about what I needed, what I wanted. It was terrifying but also exhilarating. As I headed toward my new apartment, a tiny space with peeling paint and secondhand furniture, I felt something unfamiliar: freedom. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for now, that was enough. Little did I know that while I was starting over with nothing but determination and grit, my family's world was about to come crashing down without me holding it together. It didn't take long for reality to come crashing down on them. Just 2 weeks after I left, the first signs of chaos began to appear. My phone buzzed late one evening, and when I glanced at the screen, I saw a message from my mom: Sophia, why is the electricity off? Call me. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Not even an apology, just demands. A few minutes later, another message arrived: the mortgage wasn't paid this month. The bank is calling us. Did you do something? Did I do something? The irony was almost laughable. I ignored both texts and went back to my dinner. The next day, Ryan's name lit up my phone with a notification: you're being so immature, Sophia. Stop punishing mom and dad just because you're mad. Pay the bills and grow up. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at his audacity. Punishing them? Grow up? This was coming from the same person who had stolen $5,000 and framed me for it. I didn't bother replying. For the first time in years, I felt free from their expectations, free from their manipulation. As the days turned into weeks, their situation grew worse. The electricity and water remained shut off, forcing them to rely on candles and buckets of water from neighbors. Ryan's private college expelled him due to unpaid tuition fees, and he had no choice but to move back home, a home that was now falling apart without my financial support. My parents were drowning in overdue bills, and the bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings on their house. The cracks in their perfect facade were widening with every passing day. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life piece by piece. My tiny apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. I picked up a second job to save money and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. Every night as I lay in bed, I felt a growing sense of peace knowing that I no longer had to carry the weight of an ungrateful family on my shoulders. But then came the moment that truly took me by surprise: a GoFundMe page created by my parents. One evening, as I scrolled through social media during a break at work, a friend sent me the link with a message: you need to see this. Curious, I clicked on it, and what I read made my blood boil. We are a loving family going through an unimaginable hardship. Our daughter has abandoned us during our time of need after we raised her with love and care. Please help us save our home. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Abandoned them? Raised me with love and care? The sheer hypocrisy was infuriating. They had kicked me out without a second thought after believing Ryan's lies, yet here they were playing the victims for sympathy and money. I wasn't going to let this slide. That night, I gathered every piece of evidence I had: screenshots of mortgage payments, utility bills, tuition fees, everything I had quietly paid for over the years while they took it all for granted. Then, with one decisive click, I posted it all in the comments section of their fundraiser: before you donate, know the truth. My parents kicked me out after my brother stole $5,000 and blamed me for it. They never knew that I was the one paying their bills all these years. Now that I'm gone, they're finally facing reality. Don't let them fool you like they fooled me. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, their GoFundMe page was flooded with comments from strangers who were furious about being misled. Wait, you kicked out the person paying for your house? This is karma. Not donating to liars. Donations stopped completely, and by morning, they had taken down the page in shame. For once in my life, I felt vindicated, not because they were suffering, but because the truth was finally out there for everyone to see. They had spent years taking advantage of me while treating me like an outsider in my own family. Now they were reaping what they had sown. Little did they know that this was only the beginning of their downfall. The knock on my door came late one evening, sharp and insistent, breaking the silence of my small apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I debated ignoring it. But something told me to check. Peering through the peephole, I froze. It was my father. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of what I could only assume was desperation. I hesitated before opening the door slightly, keeping the chain in place. "Dad?" I said cautiously, my voice devoid of warmth. He looked up at me with hollow eyes, the man who once stood so tall now reduced to a shadow of himself. "Sophia," he began, his voice cracking. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us as I studied him. This was the same man who had thrown me out without a second thought, who had believed Ryan's lies over my truth. And now he was here, on my doorstep? The irony wasn't lost on me. "We made a mistake," he continued, his words tumbling out like they had been rehearsed a dozen times. "Your mother and we should have listened to you. We should have believed you." He paused, swallowing hard as if the next part physically hurt him to say. "But we're in trouble now. The house, it's going to be foreclosed any day. We've tried everything, but we can't fix this without your help." I stared at him through the narrow gap of the door, my heart a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a flicker of pity that I quickly extinguished. "You want my help?" I asked quietly, my voice steady but cold. "After everything you did? After you threw me out like I was nothing?" He flinched at my words, but didn't deny them. "We were wrong," he admitted softly. "But we're your family." Family. The word hung in the air like a bitter taste on my tongue. For years, I had given everything for that so-called family, my money, my time, my love, and they had repaid me with betrayal and abandonment. Now they wanted to invoke that bond when it suited them. "Do you miss me?" I asked suddenly, my voice sharper now. He blinked in confusion at the question, but nodded quickly. "Of course we do," he said earnestly. "No," I interrupted, stepping closer to the door and looking him directly in the eye. "You don't miss me. You miss what I could do for you, my money, my sacrifices, my silence while you took advantage of me." My voice didn't waver as I continued, "You don't miss having a daughter, you miss having an ATM." He opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again when he realized he had no argument to make. The truth was laid bare between us now, undeniable and unchangeable. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly, each word like a nail in the coffin of whatever relationship we once had. His shoulders sagged further as tears welled up in his eyes, not tears of regret but tears of defeat. Without another word, I shut the door in his face and locked it behind me. Leaning against the doorframe, I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For years, I had carried their burdens on my back without complaint, believing that family meant unconditional loyalty no matter how much it hurt me. But now? Now I understood that loyalty is earned, not demanded, and that walking away doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. They had made their choices long ago when they believed Ryan's lies over my truth and threw me out without hesitation. Now they were living with the consequences of those choices, just as they should be. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept peacefully knowing that this time, I chose myself over them. It had been months since I last saw or spoke to my family, and I had no intention of changing that. My life was finally steady, peaceful, even. But one afternoon, as I walked out of my apartment building, I saw her. My mother. She was sitting on the steps, clutching her purse tightly, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether to turn back or confront her. But something in her expression, desperation mixed with shame, made me stop. "Sophia," she said softly as she stood up, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. I crossed my arms and stared at her, keeping my face neutral. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone calm but distant. She hesitated, fumbling with the strap of her purse. "We've lost the house," she admitted finally, her voice breaking. "Your father and we're staying with relatives now. Ryan, he's struggling too." She looked up at me with pleading eyes. "We need your help." I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of standing on that same doorstep months ago, suitcase in hand, as they turned their backs on me. "Help?" I repeated coldly. "You mean like the help I gave you for years? The help you never appreciated? Or the help you threw away when you believed Ryan's lies over me?" Her shoulders sagged under the weight of my words, but she didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "We were wrong." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Wrong doesn't even begin to cover it," I said sharply. "You didn't just make a mistake, you chose to betray me. You chose to believe him without even giving me a chance to explain. And now that everything's fallen apart, you want me to fix it?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out toward me, but I stepped back instinctively. "Sophia," she said desperately, "we're still your family." "No," I interrupted firmly, my voice steady and unyielding. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. Family doesn't throw someone out without proof or apology. You made your choice when you believed Ryan over me, and now you have to live with it." She tried again, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "But we've lost everything." "And so did I replied quietly but firmly. "I lost my home, my trust in you, and years of my life trying to support people who didn't care about me. But unlike you, I rebuilt myself from nothing." For a moment, there was silence between us, heavy and final. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she nodded slowly and turned to leave, her steps heavy with defeat. As I watched her walk away, I felt no triumph or satisfaction, only clarity. This wasn't about revenge or bitterness anymore, it was about setting boundaries and choosing myself for once in my life. I turned back toward my apartment building and walked inside without looking back. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and this time I wasn't going to reopen them. 2 years had passed since I walked away from my family, and in that time, my life had transformed in ways I never thought possible. I had built a career I was proud of, earned a promotion to a senior management position, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. My days were no longer consumed by guilt or the weight of others' expectations. For the first time, I was living for myself, and it felt incredible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found myself at a rooftop restaurant with friends, celebrating my latest promotion. The laughter around the table was infectious, and the clinking of glasses felt like a testament to how far I'd come. As I leaned back in my chair, soaking in the moment, a voice from behind me shattered the bubble of joy. "Sophia?" I turned slowly, and there she was, Ryan. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a worn-out expression and slouched shoulders. He was dressed in a waiter's uniform, holding a tray with trembling hands. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between us. "Oh, wow," he stammered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's been a while." I nodded curtly, keeping my expression neutral. "It has." He glanced at my table, at the laughter, the expensive wine glasses, and my polished appearance, and I could see the flicker of jealousy in his eyes. "You look good," he said awkwardly. Thanks, I replied simply, turning back to my friends as if to signal that this conversation was over. But Ryan wasn't done. Sophia, he began hesitantly, his voice quieter now. Listen, things have been really hard for me lately. You know how it is. If you could just. I raised a hand to stop him mid-sentence and turned back to face him fully. Ryan, I said calmly but firmly, did you ever pay back the $5,000 you stole from Mom and Dad? His face drained of color as he opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. He stammered something incoherent before finally muttering, I don't have that kind of money right now. Then I guess we're both out of luck, I said with a small smile before turning back to my dinner companions. Ryan stood there for another moment, shifting uncomfortably on his feet before mumbling an awkward "enjoy your meal" and walking away. As he disappeared into the crowd of diners, I felt no anger or resentment, only closure. For years, I had carried the pain of betrayal and the burden of their expectations on my shoulders. But now? That weight was gone. As the night wore on and laughter filled the air once more, I realized something profound. Walking away from toxic relationships wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was an act of self-love. My family had made their choices years ago when they turned their backs on me without hesitation. Now they were living with the consequences of those choices. And me? I was finally free to live my life unapologetically on my own terms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, freedom tasted sweeter than anything else in the world. Time passed, and I slowly began to adjust to my new life. The small apartment, though nothing special, became the place where I found peace I had never truly known before. After years of living under the pressure from my family, the feeling of freedom in every breath was something I had never experienced. I was learning to love myself, rebuilding my life from the ground up, piece by piece. Every day, I woke up early to go to work, doing my best, never allowing myself to look back at the past. I was no longer the person tied to that family. I was no longer the girl who sacrificed everything to keep those relationships intact. I had let go of old habits, responsibilities that weren't mine. And it felt liberating. That evening, as I sat with friends, enjoying a dinner together, chatting and laughing, a voice called out from behind me. Sophia? I turned around and almost didn't recognize the figure standing there. Ryan. Yes, my brother, the same person I had once protected, given everything for, only to be betrayed. Now, standing in front of me, he was in a waiter's uniform, his hands trembling as he held a tray, his expression tired, shoulders slumped. A strange sense of unfamiliarity washed over me. Oh, wow, Ryan stammered, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's been a while. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. It has. He looked at my table, the food, the expensive glasses of wine, the laughter of my friends, and I could see the flicker of jealousy in his eyes. You look good, he said awkwardly. Thanks, I replied, turning back to my friends as if to signal that the conversation was over. But Ryan wasn't done. Sophia, he began hesitantly, his voice quieter now. Listen, things have been really hard for me lately. You know how it is. If you could just. I raised a hand to stop him mid-sentence and turned to face him fully. Ryan, I said calmly but firmly, did you ever pay back the $5,000 you stole from Mom and Dad? His face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, he stammered something incomprehensible before muttering, I don't have that kind of money right now. Well, I guess we're both out of luck then, I said with a small smile, before turning back to my dinner, not bothering to look at him again. Ryan stood there for a moment longer, shifting uncomfortably, before mumbling an awkward "enjoy your meal" and walking away. I didn't feel anger, resentment, or any emotion other than closure. For once, I had found the closure I needed. As the days passed, I realized just how much I had changed. I was no longer bound by the chains of guilt, obligation, or sacrifice. I no longer felt responsible for a family that never truly appreciated me. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. Then one day, out of the blue, I saw her, my mother. She was sitting on the steps outside my apartment building, her face pale and drawn, her hands clutching her purse tightly. For a moment, I froze. I wasn't sure whether to walk away or face her. But something in her expression, desperation mixed with shame, stopped me in my tracks. "Sophia," she said softly as she stood, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. I crossed my arms, my gaze steady but distant. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone calm but not welcoming. She hesitated, fidgeting with her purse strap. "We've lost the house," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Your father and we're staying with relatives now. Ryan, he's struggling too." She looked up at me with pleading eyes. "We need your help." A heavy silence hung in the air between us. I felt a brief pang of something, maybe pity, but it was quickly replaced by the sharp sting of all the memories of when they had thrown me out without hesitation. "Help?" I repeated coldly. "You mean the kind of help I gave you for years? The kind you never appreciated? The help you threw away when you believed Ryan's lies over me?" She didn't argue. She just lowered her gaze in defeat. There was nothing left to say. The truth was too stark, too undeniable. My mother turned away, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the words I had spoken. I watched her walk away, step by step, and for the first time in my life, I felt no anger or bitterness, just clarity. I had made my choice when I walked away from them, and now they were living with the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to fix it, and I didn't owe them anything anymore. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, allowing the silence to fill the space around me. I had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, walking away is the best thing you can do for yourself. It's not about revenge or holding a grudge. It's about protecting your peace and choosing yourself when no one else will. 2 years passed since I walked away from my family. And in that time, my life had completely transformed. I had built a career I was proud of, surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, and most importantly, I had found peace. I was finally living for myself. One evening, I found myself celebrating my latest promotion at a rooftop restaurant with friends. The laughter around the table was infectious, and the clinking of glasses felt like a testament to how far I had come. As I leaned back in my chair, soaking in the moment, a voice from behind shattered the bubble of joy. "Sophia?" I turned slowly, and there he was, Ryan. His once confident demeanor was now gone, replaced by a weary, defeated look. He was wearing a waiter's uniform, holding a tray with trembling hands. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of all the unspoken words between us heavy in the air. "Oh, wow," he stammered, his smile awkward and forced. "It's been a while." I nodded curtly, keeping my expression neutral. "It has." He looked at my table, at the laughter, the expensive wine glasses, and my polished appearance, and I could see the flicker of jealousy in his eyes. "You look good," he said awkwardly. "Thanks," I replied simply, turning back to my friends. But Ryan wasn't done. "Sophia," he began, hesitantly, his voice softer now. "Listen, things have been really hard for me lately. If you could just—" I raised a hand to stop him, and turned fully to face him. "Ryan," I said calmly, but firmly, "did you ever pay back the $5,000 you stole from Mom and Dad?" His face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. After a long pause, he muttered, I don't have that kind of money right now." "Well, I guess we're both out of luck then," I said with a small smile, before turning back to my friends and the conversation, signaling the end of our interaction. Ryan stood there for a few more moments, shifting awkwardly, before muttering an uncomfortable, "Enjoy your meal," and walking away. As he disappeared into the crowd, I felt no anger, no resentment, only closure. For the first time, I was truly free. As the night went on, the laughter filled the air again, and I realized that walking away from toxic relationships wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was an act of self-love. I had made my peace with my past, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, freedom tasted sweeter than anything else in the world. A few months later, life was good. Actually, it was better than good. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of. I had a new job that I loved, a strong circle of friends, and most importantly, I had peace. The kind of peace that had eluded me for years. It was the kind of peace that only came when you stopped trying to please others and started living for yourself. One crisp autumn evening, I sat at my desk, reviewing reports for work, when I heard the familiar ding of a notification on my phone. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another work-related message. But something inside me told me to check. The screen lit up, revealing a message from my mother. "Sophia, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but we need you. Please, we're at rock bottom. I don't know where else to turn." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It had been months since I'd heard from them. Months of living without their demands, their manipulations, and their toxic expectations. I had moved on, rebuilt myself, and found my own happiness. But now, they were calling me back, asking for help, just like they always did, when it was convenient for them. I sat there for a moment, staring at the message. My heart ached slightly. It wasn't that I didn't care, but I had already given them everything I had to give. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my peace, my life for them. And for what? To be cast aside, to be blamed, to be forgotten? I sighed and set my phone down. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let myself fall into that trap again. They had made their choices, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. I wasn't going to be their savior anymore. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Work was busy, life was moving forward, and I kept my focus on the future. But then, one afternoon, while I was at a cafe, I saw her again, my mother. She was sitting at a table by herself, her eyes downcast, her face gaunt, much older than the last time I'd seen her. I could feel her gaze on me before I even realized she was there. I froze. Part of me wanted to pretend I didn't see her, to walk away and keep living my life without looking back. But something inside me told me I had to face this. I couldn't keep running from the past. I took a deep breath and walked toward her, my footsteps slow and deliberate. She looked up at me with surprise and a mixture of guilt. I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say, unsure of how to approach this new version of her, the mother who had turned her back on me, and now, the mother who seemed broken and desperate. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice strained. I didn't know where else to go. I had to see you. I sat down across from her, keeping my distance, my hands folded in front of me. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "What do you want from me now?" She looked down, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped her coffee cup. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I should have listened to you. I should have believed you. I don't know what happened to us, Sophia. I don't know how we got here. But we're not okay." I looked at her, the words stinging more than I wanted to admit. "You made your choices, Mom. You and Dad both. You believed lies over me, you kicked me out, and now you're here, asking for help? For forgiveness?" My voice faltered for just a moment before I caught myself. "You didn't care about me when I was there, when I was the one holding everything together. Now you want me to fix it? To make it better?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the same sympathy I once might have. I had already given everything I had. I had already forgiven them in my own way, by walking away. That was my closure. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. We don't have anything left, Sophia. Not the house, not the life we had. I don't know what we'll do without you." I met her gaze, trying to gauge if she truly understood the weight of her words. "You'll figure it out. Just like I did. You're not the first ones to fall apart, and you won't be the last." I stood up, leaving a few bills on the table to cover her coffee. "I've already lost everything to you. But I found something better, myself. And I'm not going to let you drag me back into the past. As I turned to walk away, I heard her voice again, soft and pleading. Sophia, please. I paused, but I didn't look back. Goodbye, Mom. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, the door closing softly behind me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull of family expectations. I didn't feel the weight of the past dragging me down. I was free. A year later, I was still on the same path, stronger, wiser, and more at peace with the choices I had made. I had a life now that was entirely mine. I had learned that family wasn't about blood, it was about the people who show up for you when it matters, who support you, who love you without conditions. One evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker below. The air was cool, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything I had earned. I was proud of who I had become, proud of the strength it took to walk away from a toxic family, proud of the life I had built. I knew there would always be people in my life who would try to drag me down, who would want to use me. But I also knew that I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone who didn't see my worth, who didn't appreciate the person I was. As the night sky stretched out before me, I realized that no matter what happened, I was going to be okay. Because I had learned one thing, you are never truly free until you choose yourself. And now, I had. Months passed, and my life had become something I was proud of. I had finally learned that love had to come from within, not from the family that had abandoned me. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, finding peace in places I once thought were unreachable. One evening, while I sat by the water, enjoying the solitude, I saw him. My father. He was older, his face marked by regret. I didn't know what to expect, but I stayed. Sophia, he said softly, his voice filled with shame. I was wrong. We both were. I'm sorry for how we treated you. I looked at him, but I no longer felt anger. I felt free. I've forgiven you, Dad. Not for you, but for me, I replied. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the weight of years gone by. I understand. And I hope you'll find it in your heart to let us back in. I took a deep breath, then said, I'm not your responsibility anymore. I've let go. As I turned to leave, I knew it was finally over. The past no longer had a hold on me.